How are you?
I am doing great. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Good to see you. Thank you for taking the time. Appreciate having a chance to have this chat with you this morning. Welcome everybody joining this webinar. Thank you also for taking the time and listening to what Sandy and I have to say for today. I think we're going to get started right away to make sure we can go through the contents. If you have any questions while we go, feel free to pop them in the chat window and we'll either address them in line or address them at the end. We'll see. And maybe as an introduction, Sandy released earlier this summer the 2024 Forrester Wave for bot management. So that was a hefty piece of research, I would say, that you released.
It always is, but it's so interesting each time to just see how the market's evolved.
Definitely. And I think there's two objectives to that piece of research. It's in the subtitle, right? The 11 providers that matter and how they stack up. But it's also a great update, especially for us today, to see, what kind of update we see in the bot management and the fraud landscape. And this is kind of what we've planned as an agenda for today. We'll go together over how bots are evolving, explore significant changes from attackers and bot vendors that you have seen over the past 2 years, that we have seen on our end as well, defending our customers. And I think it will give us a chance to understand why bots are outpacing traditional defense systems. Then we'll talk a bit about the Forrester Wave per se, understanding the process that you go through for that research, and learn what to look for in a bot management solution, in your opinion, including advanced detection models, for instance, multi-layered machine learning. Sorry. And finally, we'd like to touch upon the future. What does it look like when we talk about bot management? What kind of role will bot management have in broader cyber fraud types of defenses? So as I said, for the participants, feel free to drop your questions in the chat window, and we'll address them as we go. Sandy, I know we might be stating the obvious, of course. Rise of AI and machine learning has changed the landscape a little bit. It hasn't fundamentally changed everything, but it's definitely sped up the pace at which fraud is actually evolving. And you have an unparalleled vision, I would say, on that ecosystem. You've been watching closely a lot of vendors and been talking to a lot of customers over the past 2 years. So, what would strike you as the most impactful evolutions?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really good jumping off point because I've been covering bot management now for 5 years at Forrester. And this is actually the third time I've done a Forrester Wave. So I've really gotten to see the evolution of this market. And what's really interesting is if you go back in time, you had pretty rudimentary responses to bots. A lot of the vendors that were out there, 5 years ago, the options were block, allow, or challenge. It's much more configurable now. There are a whole range of different ways to challenge potential bots, to um, provide honeypots, to provide fake data, to provide all of these ways to get bots to get frustrated and go elsewhere. So the way that we respond to bots has really evolved quite a bit. And that's one thing that's changed quite a bit. The level of policy and just the degree of configurability in that. But to your point on machine learning, yes, a lot of the bots are using AI, but so are all of the bot management vendors, the defenders here. And it's really advanced quite a bit. Again, if you go back a few years, it was much more nascent in the space. And I think all of the vendors a couple of years ago when I evaluated this market were just starting to dip their toe into AI to defend against bots. But now it's advanced to the point where the detection approach is no longer as differentiating. It's really about how vendors are using detection models, what they allow customers to bring themselves in terms of bringing your own models, configuring additional models, feeding your own data in to add additional tagging to models. All of that is what actually stands out now as differences in the detection. So it really has evolved quite a bit. that level of customization, that level of partnership with vendors in terms of detecting new attacks and providing that information to customers, providing threat intel in very much real time. That's something that that's really become necessary and critical. And that's been an evolution over the past few years that has become really important, I think, to customers because the attackers have just gotten so smart, and the attackers are always going after that next big thing, whether it is a potential credential stuffing attack, account fraud, whether it is a flash sale that attackers are trying to go after in a very, very condensed time period, whether there is AI scraping, all of these potential attacks that could add value for an attacker. The vendors and the customers together are collaborating in order to have the latest intelligence, detect that, tweak models, customize models, and respond appropriately. To that end, the other thing that I'm actually really happy about in this market, Benjamin, is just how much reporting has improved. And I would say this is true across a lot of the security tools that I cover. Reporting has gotten a lot better. But with bot management in particular, reporting has started to cover a lot more of the business cases and really address the needs of not just your security persona, but your fraud persona or your marketing persona or your executive level persona and provide the relevant level of information for all of those people, which is important given that bots tend to hit a broader audience than a lot of other security types of attacks. So the level of customization in reporting, the level of the visualizations, and just the range of out of the box reporting that addresses all of the different needs is something that I've been really pleased to see. I would say, one of the things that's kind of interesting about bots that I think people don't think about is that it's not just about web applications, right? That's what we hear about the most. But when I surveyed customer references, 61% were also using them for their mobile apps, and 59% were using them for their APIs. By the way, I expect that that is going to increase quite a bit over the next couple of years. Yes, web applications were the first thing that everyone thought about, but web apps are built with APIs now, a lot of them. So you're going to see a lot more APIs protected, and mobile apps are pervasive, and you'll continue to see those used. The final thing that I'll point out on evolution here, Benjamin, that I think is good to see is that adoption by customers is becoming broader, like internal within the organization. Yes, there's still a subset of customers that are maybe only using this for one or two or three strategic customer facing applications. But look at the plans over the next 12 months. 59% of the customer references that I surveyed said they're planning to adopt this for all of their customer facing applications. So the realization that bots are a problem and a challenge very broadly for their applications is something that we're seeing. We're seeing a much broader adoption of bot management, even within a single organization. Is that something you're seeing too?
Yes, definitely. Definitely, we've seen, and to go back to your previous slide as well, we've seen most of our customers, well over 60%, actually do use bot management for all of their infrastructure items, be it their websites, mobile applications, and APIs. I do agree with you as well that API protection is becoming already a
Yeah.
very topical, defense mechanism that our customers expect us to put in place. And we have seen as well, and I think we'll touch upon that a bit later, but I think it's providing security must come with accountability. And I think our customers expect us more and more to actually be able to map out all of their vulnerabilities and make sure that we can point them in the right direction when it comes to securing all of their business entities, regardless of where they sit in the organization. But thank you, Sandy. That's very compelling insights. Definitely. I think now we'd like to hear about from the audience as well. So there's a poll that is going to pop up any second now. You can click on one or more, oh, there you go, buttons to respond, and we'll recap the response, the results in a minute. So what we want to know about is which use case is your top priority when it comes to a bot management solution. Scraping, account fraud, payment fraud, ad fraud, other types of use cases. As you said, Sandy, bot management covers a wide array of use cases nowadays, and we see that we get to talk to a huge kind of variety of personas within each organizations. It's not only security doesn't happen in a vacuum, and when we provide security, we are also helping business and marketing teams work better. So it does impact the overall funnel. So it's always interesting to see the types of results that we get. I think it won't be a surprise. Web scraping will come out first in that, and it's always the case. But what's interesting is that scraping used to be only about collecting data, but we see it as a gateway threat for our customers. And what I mean by that is that if you are a ticketing platform, for instance, of course, scraping is going to be the first threat because bots need to monitor your inventory before actually snatching the tickets available. But what we see is that scraping, it might be considered like an easy type of fraud, quote unquote, but it can actually be very detrimental. And we've seen a lot of scrapers, bots, used to kind of identify and assess opportunities for higher impact attacks. So they will launch scraping bots on a website, mobile application, or API to detect if there's further, opportunities for higher impact fraud. So when successful, it can leave unprotected organizations open to severe and costly ramifications. And scraping is getting more and more sophisticated as well. It's not anymore about launching a huge volume of attacks, right? It's about trying to look like human beings. And it comes out first, as we see on the results, 67% of you guys. Second is account fraud, of course, and I will talk about account and payment fraud kind of together, even if they are slightly different. But I, you know, for me, that's huge value for fraudsters when to carry out successful account fraud attacks. For a digital business, the account feature is like the key to your house, right? This is what opens up access to the good stuff. When you have an account, when you are logged in, this is the trigger for businesses to start investing heavily into a visitor, and that's where you'll get the most investment. And the accounts, they've become a fundamental part of our digital lives, right? Because they hold a wealth of our user information, fingerprint activity, gives access to payment details. So that's why I usually link account and payment fraud. You don't get payment fraud if you don't get account fraud, that's for sure. And whether they are exploiting weaknesses in authentication protocols or hijacking accounts, these cyber criminals, they're trying to work around, you know, defenses, basically. There's a lot at stake, as we can imagine, of course, from financial integrity, data security, but also user experience and regulatory compliance as well, all the way down to operational efficiency. And I'd be curious to see what we have behind others, but there's been a lot of discussion around DDoS protection as well lately. And it's an interesting trend because DDoS used to be perceived as a heavy, high volume, kind of simple attacks. They had to be cheap, designed to slow down or bring down your website. But what we see, and you can mark my words on that, it's never been cheaper and easier to launch a very sophisticated DDoS attack. And these attacks, they are getting through traditional defense mechanisms that have a more rule-based type of detection. So thank you all for your comments. Really, really interesting. Thank you for answering the poll. The trend that we've seen, they're not going to slow down. We recently published our own DataDome Global Bot Report for 2024. The results are kind of appalling, I must say. What we see is that 2 out of 3 businesses that we tested were unprotected against the most basic form of bot attacks. It's a huge part, obviously. How we got to this result, we selected about 15,000 of the largest digital businesses on the planet across all industries: bank and financial services, classified ads, marketplaces, ticketing platforms, health retailers, really everything. And we've used 2 of our latest features, Discover and Tester, to duplicate the main techniques, to mirror the main techniques that fraudsters would use on their platforms, and see if we got detected. And of course, we didn't. What's a bit worrying is that peak season is upon us. Christmas is coming up, end of the year. And out of all the websites we tested on, and out of all the e-commerce platforms that we tested, sorry, only 10% were actually 100% protected. So it's very, very low. So I would say it's kind of urgent to react. And as I say, it's not something that it's something that we've been observing, right, over the past decade. The main issue is that bots have become and will continue to become more and more sophisticated. The line between a bot and a human being is blurring up, definitely, that's for sure. And sophisticated attacks, we measured in the DataDome Global Bot Report, sophisticated attacks were detected less than 5% of the time. So it's really a trend that we see, and we can explain it a few different ways. First of all, we see a lot more IPs, right, and clean ones. The go-to IP service for a bot developer in 2024 is no longer a data center. It's clean mobile or home residential proxies. And I will share stats with you. We've been measuring that year after year, and within the span of less than 3 years, residential proxies have gone from about 25% of all proxies that we saw used by bots to a bit more than 45%. So the trend is clear, and we'll get back to that, but it makes sense because it's cheap and easy now to do so. AI, as we said, it's changed the game. It hasn't fundamentally changed everything, that's for sure, but it's made things much easier for fraudsters. Bots are now better than human beings at passing captchas, for instance. We'll get back to that. And they're also much better than ever before at mimicking human behavior. And to illustrate that, there's a few, the only option to sell out huge volume of IPs a couple of years ago were to use, data center IPs. It's no longer the case. Now it's cheap, it's fairly easy to actually rent out millions of residential IP addresses, sorry. And what's interesting is that developers are not the only one who've taken advantage of that trend. It's always interesting to see that there's now a whole ecosystem appearing to support bot developers, right? So it's an economy in its own right, right? I often say that bots as a service are a very good example. You no longer really need to be techie to be developer to actually launch a bot. You can rent them out, and they come ready packaged for a few $100 a month. So that has changed quite a bit, of course. And there's also legitimate tools on the market that are used, leveraged by bots. The new Chrome headless, the new headless version of Chrome, for instance, it's a good example. It provides the exact same fingerprint as a headful Chrome. So it makes it undetectable from a technical perspective. And beyond mere fingerprinting, oops, sorry, I went too fast, they can also provide, these tools also allow you to reproduce almost real mouse movements. So there's a whole infrastructure ready and available for bot developers. That's a good first step for them anyway. The second step was to make sure that they could make their bots actually look human, sorry. And how do they make their bot look like they can behave like human beings? Going back, we talked very briefly about CAPTCHAs. There's very interesting literature on the topic. CAPTCHAs, there's many, Google CAPTCHAs and stuff on the market, but bots have become significantly faster and better at solving CAPTCHAs than human beings, which kind of, it like doesn't really make sense. But what we saw is that about 61, 62% of all successfully passed CAPTCHA are not passed by human beings, sorry, they are passed by bots. So this very tool that is supposedly used to differentiate between a bot and a human being is more efficiently passed by a bot and not a human being. And the same way with residential proxies, there's a whole ecosystem kind of springing up around bot developers. Now, probably some of you are familiar with CAPTCHA farms. Up until a few years ago, if you wanted your bot to pass CAPTCHA, you would use CAPTCHA farm services. So basically human beings passing CAPTCHA all day long on behalf of bots. Well, the good news for them is that they no longer have to go through human beings to do that. With AI, they now use AI-powered bots to solve CAPTCHA on behalf of bots and be able to browse the web freely. So the trends are maybe a bit worrying, and it's the basis of DataDome's bot detection philosophy, the zero trust approach across all digital properties. So challenge by default, allow by exception, that must be coded and architected right from the beginning. We analyze 100% of the requests. We don't do sampling. We don't do free passes because it opens up too much security vulnerabilities. We need, you mentioned that, full integrated coverage applied across web, mobile, and APIs. And that's the first part of the philosophy. Second one is multi-layered detection approach. What that means is that don't rely heavily on a single bullet approach. Everything doesn't hinge, for instance, on client-side obfuscation. Apply multi-layered machine learning detection and protection with different methodologies to detect efficiently the most sophisticated bots. 100, that translates into hundreds of, for DataDome, at least hundreds of out-of-the-box machine learning models and thousands of customer and use case specific detection models. And we leverage, collective intelligence with new threats detected for every customer, updating our multi-layered machine learning models in real time. Third one, it's got to be real time. Performance is key here. Detection happens within 2 milliseconds, and that's very important to keep experience at its best. It must be fast to provide an effective protection, of course. And then transparency. We need to make sure that we have full accountability when it comes to detection, to improving the detection, improving the protection. We need to make sure that the challenges also can be monitored in real time by our customers and users, making sure that the false positive levels is very, very close to zero. And you must have a high level of expert support tailored to your needs. So that's kind of the philosophy behind the DataDome, and we've built that up listening to our customers. With that, I'll turn back over to you, Sandy. So you published a very compelling report a couple of months ago, and we'd like to hear about how you built that report and what key takeaways you can share with us.
Yeah, I'm delighted to, Benjamin. Thank you for that. I don't always get to give everyone a window into how my research works, and particularly how a Forrester wave works. And basically what I did for this wave, which was published in July of this year, is I selected vendors based on a criteria that you can see here, looking at those that had comprehensive enterprise class bot solutions, had a certain level of revenue, and that were relevant to our clientele. It's not a survey of every single bot vendor in the market. We have other research for that, but it's the ones that um, were deemed, as significant in the market based on their solution, based on their revenue, and based on what I hear about from my clients. And when I go through a wave, it's a pretty long process. Involves a number of steps. It involves questionnaires. It involves demos. It involves talking to customers. And ultimately, we are evaluating vendors based on a combination of the features and functionality in their current offering. That is the axis, the y-axis, and then also looking at their business strategy and their product strategy, and that's the x-axis. And the end result is, through this process, and through the combination of understanding what the vendor offerings are like and what the strategy is and how customers interact with the vendors. The output is this graphic, but it's not just this graphic. This is really scratching the surface of what we're doing. And what goes into this is a combination of a number of criteria that are evaluated based on the information provided through all the means that I talked about. What I'm really excited to talk about here, Benjamin, is some of those criteria. One of the things that I will say before I even start to share that is that as we were talking about the evolution of the bot management market, the criteria evolve every time I do this as well. There are some criteria that were very important a couple of cycles ago, something like response options. And I didn't include that this time around because it's become table stakes, because everyone has so many different options for potential responses to bots. On the other hand, new criteria, new ways to evaluate also crop up. This is the first year that I looked at detection models, for example, as something to evaluate. And every time I do this, the actual scales and the criteria evolve as well. So 2 years ago, something that could have been superior and differentiating, that may be basic table stakes this time around. So I'm always going through this and I'm looking at what's evolved and what's important right now. And I'm looking at this not from a baseline scale of what I think is good, but I'm really evaluating everyone relative to each other on this set of current offering and strategy criteria. I don't know how well you can see all of the information here, but you can see I have a list of, I want to say it's 15 or 16 current offering criteria, a half dozen strategy criteria. Each of them are assigned a weighting that then goes into a final evaluation, which is how that graphic that I just shared shows up. I'm not going to talk about all of these, but I do want to highlight a couple of them because I think it's really interesting, some of the things that stood out. You can see detection models listed here at the top. I mentioned that this is the first year that I covered that, and it's because pretty much, everyone has some amount of AI, as we talked about earlier. AI has become table stakes in fighting bots because the bots are using AI. So rather than just asking, are you using AI for detection, which was something that you could have reasonably asked a few years ago and maybe had some differentiation, now we're looking at how are detection models used? Can customers bring their own models? Can customers customize existing models? Can they add their own data into models? How well do the vendors explain their models to different customers in order to be clear about what's available? So those are some of the things that I looked at when I looked at detection models. Also looked at the extent of protection for mobile applications and APIs. You saw earlier that I think it was 61% and 59% respectively of our customer references are using their bot management for those scenarios. So how well do the solutions address that? And then there is bot explainability, which is honestly one of my favorites because it addresses that question of how do you know that it was really a bot? And it's how you answer the question when someone from your business teams comes to you and says, hey, they're saying this is a bot. I don't believe it is. Prove it. Or our customer is complaining or someone's complaining. This is what it shows you. This is why it was found to be a bot. These are the algorithms that were triggered. This is the model that set it off. These are the characteristics of this request that makes us think this was a bot. So providing all of this additional information to the security team about why this particular request really was a bot and giving that clarity of information to the organization. That's been one of my favorite criteria to really see evolve, I have to say. And then on the strategy side, we look at the product vision. We look at the innovation cadence and the innovation history. We look at the product roadmap. We look at partners. We look at a lot of the things that many of you probably look at with respect to your vendors and how they operate and respect to your partners. So it ends up being a pretty, comprehensive assessment based on this combination of information. And the other thing that I get to do in the course of this is I do talk to customer references to hear what they think about the different aspects of the offering and what they like and what they don't like. What I was able to do this time that I really enjoyed is I also got to ask them about how they are using the tool. And if I can, Benjamin, I'd like to show a little bit of that data.
Oh yeah, of course, go ahead.
Yeah.
I
So,
maybe oh sorry, Sandy, maybe before we jump, I just want to add that it's interesting because just truth be told,
yeah.
we don't know about the weighting when we go through the process. So
Right.
we know what you're going to be expecting in terms of topics, but the weighting is something that we find out when you publish the report, and it's always a very exciting guessing game uh, for us. So we try not to think about it too much, and we try to really focus on what our customers are expecting from us.
Yeah.
And we know that you talk to a lot of customers as well. So we figured, okay, if let's focus on what is expecting of us, and there's a good chance that it will match Sandy's weighting in terms of criteria, and it was very consistent, I have to say, and a lot of very interesting stuff for us because we love the fact that you talk to our customers as well because we know that they are our best advocates, and there's three things that they are consistently expecting us to deliver on like perfectly, and detection quality is always the first one that comes up. And as you said, it's not about do you use AI or not AI, is in real life situation. How does your detection engine actually behave with our real time traffic? And they want to see if we detect, and they want to match it internally. Okay, so if we see a spike in failed login, can we match it within DataDome with a spike of DDoS attack against their login endpoint, for instance? So they really go super far when it comes to testing the detection model. So I think that's one of the criteria that we like most this time, I gotta say. The second one is of course, the bot explainability. That's as we said that before, but security doesn't happen in a vacuum, and I think they need to be able to explain internally. There's a lot more stakeholders now than there were a few years ago, and it also comes from the fact that maybe cybersecurity used to be considered as part of an insurance. Pile them up as much as you can. We feel like now it's an investment as such, and our users, they need to explain why they do what they're doing with their traffic to other teams, marketing, business, the C-suite as well. They need to have the right data to be able to say, okay, we are fully protected, it's not impairing our customers' experience, and this is what is going to provide a future-proof approach to us. So that's always a nice criteria for us to work on. But yeah, just wanted to bring that up. Very consistent with what we see as well on our side.
It's funny you mentioned that, Benjamin. One of the things about this that I don't think that everyone realizes is that while we certainly assign our weightings to it and have our perception of the market, if a customer comes along who has different needs, maybe they are much more heavily invested in detection or explainability and less invested in some of the other areas, they do have the option to customize their weightings in order to essentially get a completely different view of what's going to be important to them. And it's one of the additional pieces that we offer that I always kind of enjoy pointing out to folks.
Definitely, definitely. But sorry for interrupting. I think you were going to lead us into the future
Yes.
and what's going to come up.
Yeah, I have to say I love sharing this data because I'm able to collect it when I talk to the customer references as I'm collecting information about how they use the product and how they interact with customer support and how, what they like about the vendor and what they wish was different, all of that. We also get to ask questions about how are you using the product? What are your use cases? What are your priorities? And you did the poll earlier. And the top two use cases that showed up were web scraping and account fraud, I believe.
That's correct.
So we polled our customer references around what are your highest priority use cases, and the options were primary priority, secondary priority, or not a priority. So take a look at this. Web scraping protection, 66% said that was a primary use case. 66% said account fraud protection was a primary use case. So they are matching up exactly with our audience today. These are the two things that are most commonly the top use cases. But I think if you look at this, the range of other use cases that show up either as primary use cases or secondary use cases, it speaks to what you were saying about all of these personas all of these needs, all of these issues being there. And I think that, meshes well with what we've talked about already and what our audience has been saying. So I think that was really interesting to see. The other thing that I asked that I like to understand is how they're integrating with relevant tools. So in this case, I asked about, do you integrate with security tools like a SIM? And also, do you integrate with marketing and e-commerce tools? Because remember, bot management is for a lot of different stakeholders. We just talked about that.
Mhm.
And a lot of cases, they may want to be integrating with different sets of tools in order to have that holistic view in their organization. What we're seeing right now is that a little under two-thirds of our customer references here are definitely integrating with a SIM or a SOAR. So that security integration is pretty common. Less common, but still true for a segment of our population, marketing and e-commerce tooling. 20% are integrating with something like that, whether that's, an e-commerce cloud or an Adobe marketing or something like that. Those tools are sometimes integrated as well. And it speaks to the broad range of personas that have an investment here. So let's talk about the future. Where do we see this market going? And the thing that's really interesting to me, Benjamin, is that this is a market that's bifurcating a little bit. If you go back a couple of years when this market was first starting to emerge, you had a lot of specialists. You had a lot of specialists that were really focused on the bot management problem. And over time, two things happened. They were gobbled up by other vendors, often WAF vendors, to create broader AppSec programs and AppSec platforms, or they were bought up or added to fraud platforms, or added additional anti-fraud protections on their own. So you have this market that, there are AppSec platforms now that include web application firewalls, API protection, bot management, client side. But then we also have fraud platforms that are looking at all ranges of fraud and looking at human fraud as well, and looking at threat intel related to fraud. So you're going in a very interesting direction where the standalone bot market starts to become a subset of these broader platforms and adds value to potentially very different sets of customers. And so organizations are going to approach this market in the way that most makes sense for their needs, or they may approach it from both directions in some cases. It's been really interesting to see that split. Um, because there are definitely folks that we speak to that are much more looking at this from an application security perspective, and there are people that are really looking at this from a we have to protect our organization, this is a fraud problem. Very very different types of use cases, and it explains a little bit the split that we're seeing. So what do we take away from all of this? If you're on this call, we assume that you're interested in bot management to some degree. So if you're going to go back to your organization and think about, how to be successful here, how to plan out your bot management strategy and solution, plan for that range of use cases. We just saw certainly scraping and account fraud, but also payment fraud, e-commerce fraud, ad fraud. All of those are relevant. We saw that web applications are most prominently protected, but don't forget about those mobile apps and APIs and make sure you're including them in your strategy. Build this into a broader AppSec and fraud strategy. Include some of those adjacencies that you might not think about at first. By the way, that may mean talking to additional stakeholders in your organization, going outside of your existing team and making sure that the solution that you are implementing, uh, if it addresses more than your need, take full advantage of it. Make good use of it. Integrate with those other security tools if you're looking at this from a security standpoint. If you have marketing folks on your team, make sure you're integrating with the relevant marketing and e-commerce tools. Collaborate with your vendor to really stay up to date on detection models on the latest threats. We've talked about this before, Benjamin, but this is such a partnership between the bot management vendor and the customer. No one is operating in a silo in a vacuum here. And the folks that are going to be successful in combating bots, in addressing these threats quickly, are the ones that have a really tight collaborative relationship and are being kept up to date on the latest threats. because as we've seen, the threat landscape changes so quickly. We see new attack methods coming up all the time. If you have something that you're launching, you could be a target for bots very quickly. So you don't necessarily have time to wait and see. You've got to be collaborating in order to react quickly. And then the final point I'll make, and I talked about reporting a little bit earlier on and how much it's evolved. Part of that is that it's much easier to measure the ROI with the reporting that is in place these days in a lot of bot management tooling. And being able to measure that, being able to share that with your organization so that your team and the broader team understands the value of bot management, understands why you're doing that, that becomes a critical part of really making clear what value you bring to the organization. So I'll pause there and see if you have any thoughts on any of this.
Yeah, well, I could, I'm just going to dabble down on a lot of these, that's for sure. Um, you know, you're right when, that no one should operate as a vacuum, and fraudsters definitely do not operate or do not see your organization as operating in vacuums. So when they look at your organization to try and attack you, they will look at the organization as a whole. So if you operate within several vacuums, then you open up vulnerabilities to these attacks. And RI definitely, I think it's one of the increasing trends of the moment. Cybersecurity is an investment, especially in the current economical context, and investment demands return. So we need to be able to prove that cybersecurity does provide a return somehow to the organization, and there's um, several different ways to do that. But before we move to the next couple of slides, I think there was another poll that was going to pop up on the screen to get your glimpse into these questions. So it should appear now. And that ties into one of the key topics that you mentioned several times as well, is it's good to have your website protected, but it's definitely not enough, sorry. And what we want to know today is, are you using bot management to protect mobile applications? And it's very early in the process, we put together the right SDK to protect mobile application, and it's been critical, I think, to DataDome's customers' success, mainly because mobile application, they provide a fantastic entry point for fraud attacks. So that's reassuring. We can see that 75% of you are using bot management to protect mobile application. If you're not, feel free, or planning to. If you're not, and if you have doubts or questions, feel free to reach out to us, of course. What does the future look like for DataDome? I'm just going to double down on a lot of things that you've been saying, but DataDome everywhere. More infrastructure complexity leads to larger attack surfaces and security gaps, and we want to make sure, security by CDN is too limited. We want to make sure that all of your items and all of your assets are protected. Web apps, HTML websites, of course, mobile apps, and APIs. That's a huge trend, and this is what we are integration agnostic. So we have more than 50 different server-side and client-side integrations, and every time one of our customers needed a new one, we developed it within a week. I talked about our mobile SDK. It's deployed over 800 million mobile devices at the moment, which is a huge, of course. And we also cover multi-CDN integration, because many of you use different CDNs. In terms of recommendation, how do you assess long-term efficacy of your bot management solution? Doubling down on what you said as well, Sandy, it's definitely a partnership. Discuss big factors like having the strong machine learning foundation, having the right feedback loops being integrated in your own ecosystem and your internal tools. Ask questions about the threat research team, measure their responsiveness, their effectiveness as well. Run a POC, do that. Go out and test the detection quality. That's super important. And ask questions around their metrics. What is their churn rate, their CSAT, or the NPS score? How do other customers like working with the vendor? I think it's critical that we build the right partnership, as you said. One other thing is that fraudsters will look at your organization as a whole, and they will be on the lookout for your weakest link. And as I said before, we believe that delivering security comes with accountability, and it's up to us. It's part of our mission to map out in real time all the potential attack surfaces and vulnerabilities of your organizations. Think of someone in another team that set up an API a few years ago, inactive subdomains that everybody forgot about. These are all potential vulnerabilities for your organization, and with our two latest features, Discover and Tester, we map them out in real time and we tell them how vulnerable they are to the different attacks. Might sound obvious, but make sure that your vendor keeps investing heavily into detection capacity. You want to make sure that we keep investing in all of the detection layers to stay ahead of the curve when it comes to bot attacks and fraud more generally, gathering the right signals, making sure that we have a proactive detection monitoring. So that's really something that you should be on the lookout for. That's one stat I haven't shared. Yeah, I shared that earlier. Only 5% of the highly sophisticated threats that we tested for the DataDome Global Bot Report 2024 were detected. So there's a huge gap for highly sophisticated threats. So even if you have a good enough, maybe bot management solution as part of services, make sure that it covers the most sophisticated threats. Otherwise, you might as well do nothing. And making sure that you have an integrated approach when it comes to fraud. You mentioned that as well, Sandy. It's not only about bot protection, it's also about account fraud. So we are, by design, extending our detection capacity to adjacent markets with new products, ad fraud and ad protect, sorry, and account protect. Um, the objective behind that is breaking silos, okay, making sure that you can work with the other teams within your organization and making sure that the approach when it comes to security and fraud management is integrated. This will enhance collaboration, efficiency. It will provide proactive and consistent threat detection and response across the board. You will get a better ROI, of course, as well, improved aggregated insights and analytics, and stronger compliance and reporting. And I think with that, we've come to the end of that webinar. So thank you, Sandy, first of all, and thank you everyone for listening. And sorry, Sandy, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say that thanks to everyone for joining, because this has been a great discussion. I'm wondering if we've got any questions in here.
I think we had a couple. So I had for you, Sandy. I think we had a question for Forrester. What are the top reasons that businesses add or switch vendors when it comes to bot management? Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. The most obvious one is if they are not successfully keeping up with the latest attacks and blocking the bots and working closely with customers. If there's a bad experience there. Now, you have to be careful, right? Because as I said, as a customer, you have to go in with the expectation that this is not something you just plug in once and have a set it and forget it mentality about. So if you are successful at first in battling bots, you need to maintain that collaboration, maintain that working together when the attackers change tactics, when they evolve their algorithms, when they improve their AI, and constantly, accept the rule changes, accept the model updates, work with your vendor on it. So if you're in a situation where you're unhappy with detection, but you haven't had any interaction with your vendor in the last 6 months, well, that's probably on you as a customer. But if you have been working closely with your vendor and you're still not getting that level of detection that you think you need, that is a reason that folks are changing vendors. I think the other thing that sometimes comes up, though, Benjamin, is around just relationship and ease of implementation and getting it up and running. If it's hard to use, if it's hard to manage, if it's hard to maintain, and by the way, this isn't just a bot management problem, like this is a broader AppSec issue. if it's hard, if it, if you run into a lot of trouble with the implementation, you may be more likely to look elsewhere. But those are the things that stand out. You certainly, if it doesn't detect effectively, that's going to be one of the top reasons people bail.
which makes sense. And it's
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
it's reassuring actually that it's one of the key criteria, definitely. Um, we also had a question about, and that pops up a lot, and I think we can both kind of address that. But it was like how much do clients have to justify their bot management investment? And I know that we are very product driven at DataDome, and every time we have a question, we try to find a product solution to that question, and we've done that with the ROI approach as well. Um, we talk to, of course, we have all of our customers that we talk to on a very, very regular basis, and we try to understand how they report on bot issues and fraud issues internally, and how do they measure. They used to measure success, they measure return on investment now. So it's about trying to understand how much it costs when you have a large DDoS attack that fall through the net of your DDoS vendor and is handled by your bot management vendor. Okay, so how would it cost you if that attack had been successful, for instance, in terms of resources and and availability and that kind of stuff. Um, there's of course, for me, there's also like fraud related costs. Okay, if you do have a data leak from a regulatory perspective, how much is that going to cost your organization? But it's also from a reputation perspective, how much does it cost you when there's a data leak that goes public? How much trust do you lose from your users? So that's usually what comes up as the first type of ROI approach items that they look at. But I'm wondering if you have any other insights from the customers you've talked to.
A couple of years ago, when the economy was starting to get a little bit shaky, Janet Worthington and I wrote a report about application security in a down market. And I talked about bot management a little bit then because one of the hidden costs of bots is you're potentially getting charged for, a lot of throughput and traffic and, bandwidth that isn't producing anything particularly good for you and is in fact actively producing something detrimental. So one of the other sort of benefits of bot management that I think we don't talk about as much is you're blocking a lot of that stuff. You're making it go elsewhere. And as you're thinking about the ROI, as you're thinking about continuing to justify costs, particularly in these times where budgets can be really tight, think about that bandwidth cost as well and make sure that you're accounting for that as you're doing everything else. You talked about layer 7 DDoS attacks at the top of this, Benjamin, and
Mhm.
that is a part of it.
Definitely, very good point. Thank you. And we had one other question was, but I think we kind of addressed that quite a bit, but how important is it to use bot management on all customer-facing assets? So yeah, I mean, my response to that is obviously, why would you lock a door to leave a window open type of approach? But I know it's not, it's easier said than done because you've got to start with, well, making a list of all the sets that are exposed out there. But yeah, I would say pretty important from what you shared as well.
Yeah, in an ideal world, you want to get to that point where you're doing it all. Now, if you're starting from nothing, choose your highest priority assets at first and prove it out and show the value, and then you can expand. But unless you're talking about, a static web page that has your contact, information on it and nothing particularly interesting to scrape and doesn't accept any input, pretty much all of your applications are potentially a target for a bot, whether it's via web scraping, whether it's via account fraud, whether it's via e-commerce fraud. So obviously there are different levels of threat. Do some prioritization, figure out which ones to protect first and how. But the expectation is that most of your customer facing assets are going to be worth protecting.
Mhm.
And when you think about API security in particular, just the need to have a good discovery around all of your APIs adds an element of this to make sure you're actually putting bot protection on everything.
Definitely. That's a use case that we've had so many times.
Yeah.
Customers thinking that they had all of their APIs covered, and we launched that discover feature I was telling you about, and they could see all the APIs and the domains and subdomains pop up on their screen with the the exposure level right next to
Yeah.
it, and but I think it brought a sense of, oh, okay, we're gonna get there, we're gonna get covered because the first step is done now. We know all of our vulnerabilities, and then it's just a question of, as you said, prioritizing which ones need to be secured first.